Well, thanks everyone for showing up this morning. Wanted to give special thanks to Ramsey, who really spearheaded the effort to put this together and put a lot of time and effort into getting this going. BrightWire's been pretty busy the last year or so. My business partner, Gordon, and I have been doing this for about 12 years now, and he's here to lend some moral support. Hopefully not too much heckling back there. But there's a lot of familiar faces here, and wanted to give thanks to our clients that are here today that have essentially put faith into BrightWire to help, run their businesses and support them. And really, we're just another small business in the community. We've gone through a lot of growth over the last 10, 12 years, and we've got a pretty clear focus on what we'd like to accomplish in the next 2, 3 to 5 years. And I think that some of the lessons that we've learned over the past 2, 3 years with some pretty strong growth, we can kind of talk about today and talk specifically about IT and how we can help give some guidance. Whether you're using us now or not, that's really not the point of today's session. It's really more about optimizing your business, minimizing risk, and maximizing your IT investment, however it is you're doing that now. I've had the opportunity a couple of times now to speak to the scale-up group with Celia Nightingale's team, and that's been really fun, and it's been quite a great honor. So Ramsey and I put together this presentation today. We've got some prizes for those of you who showed up. There's a little drawing, and hopefully we can give you some value today. So he's gonna steer a little bit here. So a little bit about, here's our thank you. Hopefully everyone got some breakfast. There's an interactive poll. If everyone has their cell phones ready, you can go to slido.com, and the event ID is 6210, and we have 3 questions that we've prepared that kind of go in line with the presentation itself. Just to kind of get a little bit of a poll. It's a live interactive feedback. It's all anonymous, so you can answer freely. And hopefully we'll have some fun today. I'm going to go over here so I'm not in the bright lights. So a little bit about BrightWire. We were founded in 2005 here in Olympia. Gordon and I didn't know each other at all. Our wives met at a volunteer group, and we were both in IT at the time, and we started discussing a partnership. So our first month of business was in February of 2005. So we started with a merger and an acquisition, essentially. Over the years, we had steady growth, and we're now 13 people on our team. We've got a very clear vision on what we would like to do in the community here and also in the region. Within 50 miles or so, we'd like to be essentially the go-to company for IT management for companies that are in a growth mode. That's really articulated in our vision. Presently, we're supporting 45 organizations and companies in the area, and at last count, it was something in the neighborhood of about 1,300 employees. So we kind of look at that as if we were like a mid-sized organization. In order to support that many organizations and that many people, we have to have very tightly defined processes that we're constantly improving on. That can be a struggle at times, but that's kind of what this presentation is about, is developing, I'll get into it in a bit, but kind of an operational maturity level. There's just not a way for us to provide good levels of support without having very focused, very clear processes and operations. And we learn from our clients as well. I mean, lots of our clients are much bigger than we are, and they run really, really good organizations. So that's our commitment to be the regional IT leader in the area. Right now, we're actually one of the larger companies in Olympia and Tacoma, even at 13 people for what we actually do. So the 3 things we'd like to talk about today is maximizing productivity, how you can do that in your organization in general, and also with an IT perspective. What decisions can you make from how you're using IT today versus how can you achieve your business goals, maximizing IT. Alongside of that is minimizing risk. I'm sure most of you have heard in the news all of the ransomware, HIPAA breaches, security. It's a moving target. It changes constantly. So we're really at the forefront in protecting our clients, organizations. Over the last year or so, we've really done a lot toward deploying systems that allow us to prevent and mitigate the chance of something like that happening. It can be really devastating. Even if you recover, there's a lot of downtime and disruption to your organization, so we're really putting a lot of effort into that. And then finally, kind of maximizing cost effectiveness of IT. Obviously you want to do that in business in general, but how can you get the best bang for your buck in the IT perspective? Really what we see out in the field is a person who is kind of running IT part-time, but they have other duties in the organization, or there's some sort of an outsourced model. Maybe it's a small IT company that just kind of comes out when things are not working right. Or there's the option to hire an IT person on staff. There's pros and cons to that. It just kind of depends on the size of your organization. Or you can partner with a company like BrightWire, and oftentimes we work with internal IT departments, or we actually become the de facto IT department for the organizations that we support. So if you guys are on Slido.com, everybody have that okay? Any trouble? We've got Gordon here for tech support actually today. So this is really about how well is your 3 to 5 year plan defined, specifically with IT infrastructure, software solutions that you use to run your business. This really goes in conjunction with your overall business plan in terms of where you'd like to take your organization over the next 3 to 5 years. I'm assuming most organizations here today are expecting growth, or they're looking for growth. And there's risk with that as well in terms of how well you've got that planned out, and a concept we'll get into in a moment about organizational maturity levels. So the number one is we're doing okay. We have a plan and schedule for replacement that we sometimes follow. And I don't think anybody had that's good. So the good news is nobody here has the duct tape and baling wire approach, which is good to hear. I found this quote late last night when I was working on the final part of this presentation. Give me 6 hours to chop down a tree and I will spend the first 4 sharpening the axe. Abraham Lincoln. I've never heard that quote before, but I thought it was really great because it really points to planning and preparation and making sure that the tools that you're using are optimized before you actually start working. So I thought that would be a great segue. This is a concept that we follow at BrightWire. A lot of times it specifically has to do with IT management, but really it's for any organization. So there's this concept of operational maturity level. Level 1, level 2 through 5. Typically a new business starting out is going to be a level 1 or a level 2. And as the management team gains experience and as they start growing and as they start feeling organizational dysfunction and pain, they either don't progress and they're not very profitable, or they start figuring out ways to make things more efficient. They start developing processes. Typically that's going to be kind of your level 3. As you start getting into level 4, you start really killing it in terms of operational efficiency. You start documenting every single process that you do. You start organizing your team, your company into teams that have responsibilities. That's kind of the tricky part from level 3 to level 4 is the idea that pretty soon communication between these groups of teams is really the most critical thing, and that's really where IT starts to play a role. So you start having collaborative efforts. Not everyone necessarily knows what the other person's doing at any particular time. Back when you were level 2, there was a few key stakeholders who pretty much knew everything. We went through this whole process, and we probably started out at roughly a level 2 when we first started, with the idea that we would progress, and we're probably somewhere in the level 4 range at this point in terms of providing internally for BrightWire itself. And part of the reason for that is that as we grew, there is no way we could provide support to the companies that we support without having that capability. And as it turns out, whether you're dealing with vendors or partner companies or even customers to a certain degree, you have to be close to the same level in order to really function together. So from our point of view, if we were dealing with a level 1 or level 2 company, it would be very difficult for us to support them because they don't get it. They wouldn't see the value in what we provide. On the other hand, it would be challenging for us to support a level 5 company, or they would push us into that role. And we've seen that happen over the last couple of years. We've brought on some clients that are pretty big, almost enterprise level clients, and it's really forced us to up our game. And we felt some of that tension between our capabilities, what we were able to do a year or two ago, and what we can do now. So some key kind of very general high-level concepts in terms of maximizing your productivity in your own organization would be to take a look at the level of standardization in your organization now. How many processes do we have developed? Is there some sort of a choke point in our organization? We've seen some of that in our own organization over the last 10 years. We've used some of these systems. We're in the process of replacing 3 major platforms in our organization. We have a procurement system that is out of date and needs to be upgraded. We have we're starting to outsource our admin functions at this point. We moved our payroll to another system, and we are moving toward Office 365, and we've also completely replaced our main systems monitoring maintenance platform. We had one that we had used for over 10 years, and it just was not meeting our needs anymore. So we had to evaluate the cost of that. There's going to be organizational pain shifting from one platform to the other, but we made the decision that it would be more painful and it would inhibit our growth if we weren't able to get onto a new system that's going to make us more scalable. And to date, so far, our staff, for instance, loves the new platform. It's easier to use. They're going bananas on configuring it. It's allowing us to do more with less. So we're building efficiency in our organization in that manner. And so at that point, you need to implement changes that optimize your internal resources and that help build collaboration between these teams that you've developed that each have their own functional responsibilities. I put the Office 365 on there as a real simple solution for most of our clients that we're doing now. What we typically see is a completely disjointed Office and email setup where you have multiple versions of software running. It's impossible to track the licensing. Microsoft, it took them probably 6 years to get this right, but they finally got the licensing model down that it makes sense to make this recommendation to our clients. We get everybody onto the same platform. We standardize everybody, not just in the organization in particular, but specific across all of the companies that we support, so that our team knows exactly what to do to support these clients. We can track the licensing. It makes things much more efficient for us and therefore much more efficient for our clients.
Does Excel work the same?
Yes.
You didn't used to though, right?
There's an online version of Excel as part of this, but the licensing allows you to download a full copy just like you do now. So there's less versioning problems. There's a possibility with a legacy system that a particular application wouldn't work the same way it did before, so that's a little bit of planning and discovery. But essentially, you're using the same software. And there's online versions, but they're not full featured, but they're pretty close. So this is an example of a process, one of many processes that BrightWire's developed. Gordon spent 18, 24 months working with a consultant, an outsourced consultant that helped us develop our operations. So, once you get to this point, you can start doing incremental changes. So we've got the system set up. This is essentially how a ticket, when someone calls our organization or sends an email, this is the process that this goes through. And this touches probably 4 people throughout the life cycle of this request. So this is an example, it's a flow chart, it's a logic tree of how we handle various things. And this is very customized for our operation. It has to do with the service level agreements that we have with various clients. There's small, medium, and large type of things. So that this guides our team so that we know there's no There's very little room for interpretation. And what happens is if there is a breakdown of some kind, we're able to go back to this and say, was this a mistake that somebody made, or was this a process problem that had to do with service delivery? And so we get a lot of feedback from clients, and as you know, if we drop the ball, we fix it, and then it gets better. It gets better and better and better as we go. Does this look familiar to anyone? So unfortunately, this is a metaphor for what we typically see when we come into a new client, probably 95% of the time. And there's a reason for that. The reason is that and this is maybe specifically focused on IT, but it's usually a mess. And when we see this, we look at the rest of it and we say, without even looking at it, we can tell that there's a lot of work to do. Because these are real life examples of situations we've come into, and we'll say, well, if the wiring looks like this, what does the rest of the infrastructure look like? And this is what it looks like after we get done. So a lot of this is neat and tidy. This is an actual BrightWire client that had a little bit of a wiring mess that we cleaned up, and this is a metaphor for what we work on with our clients on an ongoing basis to optimize their IT and help them focus on optimizing their organization for what they're really good at. In the same way that we outsource a lot of things to various vendors and so forth to optimize our organization. I think we have another poll question, something to do with minimizing risk. Is everybody familiar with ransomware? I recall a couple of instances a few years ago. We got a phone call from a client that we supported, but they weren't a regular client, and they had been hit by what was probably one of the first instances of ransomware. They couldn't open any documents anymore. We went in and looked at it and went, wow, this is crazy. I mean, we'd heard about it, but we hadn't seen it in real life. And there was nobody really watching anything. It was just, they had their backups running, and they were lucky because backups tend to fail if they're not monitored, but they were working great, and we were able to go in there and recover them. A few years later, one of our clients called us up and said, hey, I've got a colleague who is in trouble, and I said, you guys could probably help him out. And it turned out it was an eye clinic up in Tacoma, and they'd been hit by ransomware. Someone in their organization went to their Yahoo page and opened up an email, and that had a malicious payload, and it encrypted their network, and their IT guy didn't move their backups when they had made some changes, and they had no backup for 10 months. And so they paid the ransom, and it took them 9 days. They were down for 9 days. Problem was they had some scheduling software that was hosted in the cloud, but they had no patient history. So as their patients were coming in, they had to say, you know, I don't really remember what we talked about the last time you were here. So, but they were lucky. They managed to get back by paying the ransom, and they got the key, and they were able to decrypt it. So this is probably this is the worst I've seen in 15 years in IT over the last 2 years, is this ransomware. I think it's something on the order of $200 million a quarter in 2016 in ransoms paid. And so that, who knows what the impact was to the businesses that had that. So, okay, we have one more person than last time. We've been lucky so far. We've sorted from backups, countermeasures. Well, that's good. I'm glad nobody had to threaten the extortionists in Russia with Liam Neeson.
I think this points to how much is out there. The fact that 25% of this room has been hit with ransomware.
Yeah. I've read somewhere it's 40% of every business has dealt with it in one way or another. So this is a key focus for us in this year in particular, is to set up a security platform that allows us to really mitigate this risk. So it's just not enough anymore to have antivirus. You've got to have, we always say belt and suspenders, but we have probably 6 or 7 security platforms that are all kind of interrelated from different vendors that we put together to help us prevent or mitigate ransomware in particular, which is especially devastating. You can go to Cyber Threat Map online and you can actually see representations of the attacks that are going on. Most of them are coming from the former Soviet Union, Russian Federation. Go ahead, I'm done with this one. I found this little infographic. SANS.org is a security organization for the IT industry. Not to get into the minutia, but this is essentially the things that we have to deal with just on the security side for clients, not to mention business development and day-to-day IT support. But that just kind of gives you a sense of the scope that's required to do this. This is a very simple graphic that kind of shows how ransomware works. Someone opens up an email, it starts encrypting your data, it searches your network, it does it all silently so they don't know what's going on. Typically this is phishing email, which I'll get to in just a moment. So basically, once everything's encrypted, you get a ransom note that says, hey, your data is locked, you can't get back to it until you pay us a ransom. It used to be $500, now it tends to be, they start evaluating how much data they've encrypted and they'll send you a ransom note for $10,000, $15,000, $20,000. There was a ski lodge in Austria that got hit by this last year, and it locked all of the guests out of the hotel because it attacked their key card system. And they paid $1,500, and I thought, wow, if the extortionists knew that they had locked up a 5-star hotel with lots of very wealthy people out in the snow, I'm sure they could have gotten a lot more than $1,500. So this is something that we are rolling out to clients this year. There's a few here already that have this tool. This is a security awareness platform that we use. It allows us to actually send these types of emails to our clients, and it allows us to track their behavior. So if they happen to open these emails, we know about it, and we can essentially train them. And there's videos that go along with that, and it just sort of does a good job of educating staff on what not to do so that they're aware, that they're aware of the type of efforts that are coming through nowadays. And a lot of times it'll look like it's coming from within your organization. It'll come from the CEO. It'll look like, you need to do this wire transfer, or the FedEx package is late. It'll send it to the shipping department. We got an email actually that went to our AP address that said, hey, I haven't heard anything about this invoice that you needed to pay. And of course, I recognized that it was not a vendor of ours, but we have a new admin person, and I didn't want her to open it. So I had to get on the phone to make sure that she wasn't going to open that email.
How accurate are those flags? I mean, would our staff be dealing with constant
No.
flags?
There's an initial training process. And so we'd come out and kind of work with your team. And then it's kind of a drip campaign. It happens over, they might get 2 or 3 a month. Hopefully they don't click on anything. It's been very effective once we've gone through the training. And we can also do things like leave USB keys on the tables. And if they, confidential, if they plug that in, it'll phone home to us and say, hey, this person took a USB key that said payroll, and they wanted to take a look at it. That's a very common way that networks are infected by somebody will just leave a USB key out in the parking lot or something, and it doesn't happen very often. But this is another tool that we're using to not only for new potential clients, but with existing clients. We'll go in and evaluate in a very simple red, yellow, green. This is where you are right now. So when we go out to a new prospect, it's typically, I think the average score is about a 35. This is, unfortunately, a healthcare provider in the Olympia area that didn't really think there was any value in us coming in to do an audit of any kind. And they had a few green areas, but there was a lot of issues with how they were set up. Man, it was pretty bad. And this is an example of an existing client. What we're able to do is show them there's some security things that we'd like to deploy. The infrastructure was some wireless that they need to do that they're aware of, and that they need to do some workstation updates. We want to get everyone on a consistent infrastructure program so that they don't have old systems running for too long. So this allows us to kind of make sure that all of our clients are 90, 95 or better on this evaluation system, and it holds us accountable because we're coming to these reports and saying, we're doing well in all these different areas, but it's a dynamic field. Six months ago, we didn't have the tools for the security platform, and so now we want to roll those out to everybody. So we want to highlight that and let them know that this is something that should be done. I read this the other day, minimizing risk, HIPAA, for those of you who are in the healthcare field. The OCR just fined an organization $475,000 for not reporting a breach. I think that was done as a way to send a message. The HIPAA high-tech regulations now, not everybody is under compliance, but more and more people are. Our stance on this is that HIPAA high-tech can be a pain, but they really are best practices for any organization. So even if you're not under compliance, it's probably a good idea to at least try to follow the recommendations and guidelines. Not that you would necessarily be involved in a breach or anything like that, but my social security number has been breached. I have to do a PIN number now to file my taxes because there was a database that my social security number was in, and I have no control over that. It's gone. Poll question number 3. So we have a pretty half the room has an IT provider that's focused on IT full-time, tech-savvy employee, and then an IT provider that charges when anything down or breaks. So about 50% and then 50% the other way. So obviously we're advocates of outsourcing, but that isn't necessarily the right solution for everybody at any particular time. And so what we typically come into is that one of those 3 scenarios. Either there's a small break-fix type company that's helping kind of manage the IT, and typically what happens is that organization itself starts to grow and essentially overwhelms the IT provider. And there can be a period of time where that realization takes time to develop, but once that decision's made, they start looking for more help. The other one we see is the part-time person, maybe an office admin or a CFO or the finance person or the most tech-savvy person in the organization. That person is devoting some of their time to IT. Similar situation, at some point, if that organization is growing, not only does that person get overwhelmed, but they're really not focused on what they were originally hired to do. So you're not really getting the best mix of support either way. And then sometimes we see a situation where there is an IT provider, but for whatever reason the relationship isn't working, but that's pretty rare. I mean, usually it's there's some sort of dysfunction that's happened as a result of growth or change, or we had a law firm up in Tacoma. There was a admin person there that was doing their IT for close to 13 years and gave us notice, and 2 weeks. And so we were referred in there, but we had to go in and kind of scramble. So along with this, as far as IT management goes, our organization internally, we measure everything. I mean, we measure minutes, hours, operational maturity, process change, things of that nature. So I would encourage, if you aren't already doing this now, is look at areas in your organization that could be measured and against operational efficiency in terms of how are you utilizing your resources and dollars. Does it make sense? It might make sense if you're a small organization to have someone in the organization do 2 jobs for a while, but try to recognize when that's not going to work, or realize that it's not always going to be that way. So we've kind of developed just a very simple conceptual chart to kind of illustrate that a bit. So there's a combination of in-house or outsourced, part-time versus full-time. And any one of these things could be the correct model for your organization at a certain point in time. But you want to try to figure out ways to recognize when that's not working. And typically, you don't know what you don't know. So it can be a bit of a challenge. In our organization, we've never had a staff attorney. We've never had a staff CPA. We've mixed marketing efforts. We've done internal marketing, and we have a marketing group that works with us. So, in that regard, we're kind of a mix. And so you can have a little bit of both. You have to do some of this stuff internally, but there's certain points in time, Ron handles all of our insurance needs. I don't want to think about that kind of stuff. I just want to know what my options are and make an educated decision and try to get the best investment of our resources. So the most tech-savvy employee, the effectiveness typically isn't, among these four options, is typically not the best because it's not their area of training. It's just they sort of inherit this function and they kind of go with it. The break-fix IT support is really, quite honestly, kind of an antiquated IT model. There's no collaboration. There's no partnership between the IT provider. I mean, there can be, and the company, but because it's pay-as-you-go, there's no opportunity for that organization, that company, to really spend a lot of time to do the things that are really necessary, all the under-the-hood, boring things that need to be automated, that the in-house IT person sometimes has struggled with, checking the backups, making sure the antivirus is up to date, making sure every machine, we don't even like to do that stuff. We try to invest in tools that automate that type of thing as much as possible so that we can focus on, ideally, helping companies do a better job of running their organization by developing this partnership where we're part of their team. That's actually part of our mission statement. The break-fix IT support can be effective, but there's some pros and cons to that. A full-time IT staff person can be very effective. The challenge is that typically you need good IT support when you're 15, 20, 25 staff. It doesn't make a lot of sense to hire somebody at $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year and then have them do patch management and antivirus and all these other things. And then you still have to invest in those tools on top of that. It can make a lot of sense if you're a bigger organization, and we partner with companies in that regard so that they're taking on a certain element of it, and we call that co-managed IT, where we're doing a lot of the automation and they're doing some of the other things, and we're kind of doing projects with them. Or if you have somebody on staff that has a very particular skill set, like an operations person, Satina here has operations people that know their core application very well, and so we collaborate in that regard. And then, of course, the full managed IT services, and that can come in various flavors, but that has the potential to be the most effective as long as the IT provider itself has a high level of operational maturity. There's a lot of companies that are calling themselves managed services providers, but they don't really have, at this point yet, the skill set in-house and the operations to really pull it off. So the most tech-savvy employee is the most risky because they can give their notice, they can get sick, they can go on vacation from time to time, and that's, of course, when things are going to have a problem. Break-fix can be less risky, but there's still an element of risk. IT staff person, just depending on the situation, it can be good. And managed services, assuming again that it's with a solid company, can be the least amount of risk overall. There is still a huge investment, though, in terms of developing that relationship and making sure that there's a compatibility between the two organizations. So it certainly takes a lot of time. You're really entrusting a key part of your organization to somebody that's not part of your organization, but there can be pros and cons to that. And of course, the most tech-savvy employee on paper is the least amount of cost. We try to evaluate, you're paying the least amount of dollars, but are you getting the right amount of value?
Is there a general rule on like percent of revenue that one should spend on security?
On IT?
Yeah, right.
That is the $100,000 question. I was just trying to solve that problem, and I've asked that question lots of times myself. And my calculation, and it depends on the size of the organization, but I would say probably somewhere in the 3 to 4, maybe 5% of your total revenue. And that really is driven by a lot of different things. If you're a financial services company and you have compliance, your IT is going to be necessarily more expensive, so it might be a greater percentage. It could be 2%. If you're a smaller company, there's going to be a certain amount of IT management and licensing and hardware and all kinds of things that go into it that is going to be sort of a minimum buy-in to do it right. Large organization may have a smaller percentage because maybe they're supporting 300 people and they have the infrastructure to support that, but as a percentage of their revenue, if you have 300 people, typically you're going to be a pretty well-run organization. That's not always the case, but
Follow up on that?
yeah.
So when you said 3 to 5%, is that just the IT management services and not the?
I would say that's probably a total spend. You can kind of run the numbers all kinds of different ways. It depends on the licensing model that you choose. It depends on if you purchase equipment outright versus doing some sort of a, hardware as a service lease type arrangement.
What about all the systems, like client management systems and stuff that you have licensing with? Is that included in that 3 to 5%?
Not in my calculation, because that's a tough one. I have much more understanding of the total cost of the infrastructure and sort of the core licensing and the support that goes along with that. And I was looking at typical IT salaries as well. I was kind of running off the number that the average salary, the median salary is $50,000 a year. Now, for anybody. So that might be a $25,000 a year person and a $75,000 a year person, but all mixed together. It depends on the organization, depends on the size. But if you run all those numbers together and kind of come up with averages, your total payroll, if you're a 20 million or a 20-person company, you're going to have a certain amount of revenue to support 20 people, or why did you hire them? And there's going to be salaries and benefits and everything that go along with that. And there's going to be an IT infrastructure behind that, so 2, 3, 4% for that, maybe 5%. It's just like anything else. Our healthcare for us is probably 4% of our total revenue. It's essentially the cost of an employee every year, right, Ron?
That 3 to 5% has been an industry benchmark for as long as I've been in IT, which is 20 plus years. And I feel that with more and more reliance on technology, that number has to be shifting upwards. In the last 5 years, you've probably seen your spend in IT increase because there's so many more systems that are in the cloud and you have to pay for them on a monthly basis, things of that nature. So I feel like that number may be shifting up because we're becoming.
Well, and also with security and compliance. So, we see some of the benefits of, the cloud model. Really all that means is you're shifting things from in your building to some sort of a hosted platform, and typically the licensing model that goes along with that is per user. And a lot of people resist that because, I can buy Microsoft Office and it costs me $200 and I can run it for 5 years. But there's a cost to that because eventually you're going to have 4 versions of Office and things aren't going to be on the same, they're not going to be the same. You're going to run into trouble with that. The costing now is such that I make the case, I'm not necessarily a fan of Microsoft one way or the other, but I make the case that it does make more sense just to get on that licensing model, because if you're scaling your business with more people, you know exactly what it's going to cost you, and if for whatever reason you have to scale back, you can reduce that license count as well. So the benefit of that model overall is that it tracks very closely with your actual business growth and development or downturn or whatever, which can also be a benefit of outsourced IT, because you didn't hire the IT guy internally, or you're having somebody in-house that's kind of co-managing it. You can map your IT spend closely to your actual business growth, as opposed to having a huge amount of investment in one person or somebody that may not be there forever. But again, it depends on the organization that you're working with. So this is what happens when you prepare a slide deck at 1 o'clock in the morning and get the last pieces in here. I went to Firefox and this little infographic was there, and I thought, I want to make sure I provide value to everyone here in the room, and I know this is a great tip, so you're welcome.